Your soulmate just received a phone call, and shockingly, it was about my beloved child. Your soulmate just received a phone call they were never expecting, and the moment they heard what the caller had to say, everything around them seemed to disappear. At first, they almost ignored the call. The number wasn't familiar, and something about the timing felt strange. But they answered anyway. A calm voice on the other end asked one simple question: "Are you the person closest to them?" Your soulmate froze, because the caller wasn't asking about a stranger. They were asking about you. Then came a detail that made their heart pound, a detail about your past that your soulmate believed almost nobody knew. They sat down, listening carefully, wondering how this person knew your name, your connection, and something you had quietly done long before your soulmate understood how deeply you cared. But the caller wasn't finished. In fact, that first revelation was only the reason they had called. What happened next changed the entire tone of the conversation. The caller explained that your name had recently come up because of something that had been hidden, overlooked, or misunderstood for a long time. Your soulmate immediately started asking questions. Why now? Who brought your name up? And why were they being contacted instead of you? There was a pause on the other end before the caller revealed something even stranger. Someone had apparently kept a record connected to a decision you once made, and that decision may have protected your soulmate from a situation they never even knew existed. Don't skip, because this is where your soulmate's emotions began to shift. Confusion turned into disbelief. Disbelief became silence. They started remembering moments when you seemed distant, moments when your choices made no sense, and moments when they may have judged you without knowing what was happening behind the scenes. Suddenly, those memories were beginning to fit together, but one important piece was still missing. Then your soulmate asked the question they had been afraid to ask since the call began: "What exactly did they do for me?" The caller didn't answer immediately. Instead, they said there was something your soulmate needed to know first. Apparently, what you had done wasn't accidental, and it wasn't something you expected recognition for. You had made a deliberate choice that cost you something emotionally, simply because you believed it would keep your soulmate from facing a painful truth before they were ready. Hearing that, your soulmate could barely speak. Could this explain why you once stepped back when every part of you seemed to want to stay? Could it explain why certain people suddenly disappeared from the situation? Stay till the end, because the caller finally mentioned one specific person connected to what happened, and the moment your soulmate heard that name, they realized this phone call wasn't really about your past at all. It was about something involving you that had just happened again. The name on the other end of that phone call changed your soulmate's expression instantly. They knew this person. Not casually, either. This was someone who had been around during one of the most confusing periods between you and your soulmate, someone who always seemed to know more than they admitted. Your soulmate leaned forward and asked, "Why are they involved in this?" The caller hesitated, then revealed that this person had recently tried to contact someone connected to you. That alone was strange, but what made it unsettling was the question they had been asking. They wanted to know whether you had finally told your soulmate the truth. What truth? Your soulmate's mind started racing. Suddenly, this wasn't just about something you had done in the past. Someone was worried that a secret had finally reached the one person they never wanted to hear it. Your soulmate refused to let the conversation move forward without answers. They asked what you had supposedly been hiding, and that was when the caller carefully corrected them. They weren't hiding something from you, the voice explained. They were hiding something for you. Those words landed differently. Your soulmate went completely quiet. According to the caller, there had been a moment when you discovered information that could have shattered their trust in someone close to them. Instead of rushing in with accusations, you quietly tried to confirm what was true. And while your soulmate may have interpreted your silence as distance, you were actually watching, waiting, and protecting them from reacting to something before you had proof. But here's the question your soulmate couldn't stop thinking about: if you eventually found that proof, why didn't you tell them? Don't skip, because the answer to that question was connected to the real reason this mysterious call happened today. The caller then mentioned something your soulmate remembered immediately, a conversation from months ago when you unexpectedly asked them whether they truly trusted the people around them. At the time, your soulmate thought it was just a strange question. Now it felt like a warning they had completely missed. Their breathing changed as the pieces began connecting. You had known something even then. You had tried to make them notice without forcing them to believe you. And apparently, one person realized exactly what you were doing. That person began working quietly to keep you from revealing what you had discovered. Your soulmate whispered, "Did they try to separate us?" Another silence followed. Then the caller said something far more surprising: "Separating you may have been only part of it. There was another reason they needed you out of your soulmate's life, and the caller had just uncovered what that reason was." For several seconds, your soulmate couldn't say a word, because the caller's next revelation made the entire situation feel different. The person who wanted you pushed away wasn't simply jealous of your connection. They were afraid of what you had noticed. Long before anyone suspected them, you had picked up on small inconsistencies. Stories that changed, private conversations that suddenly stopped when you entered the room, and decisions being made around your soulmate without their full knowledge. You never had enough proof to accuse anyone, so you stayed careful. But apparently, your silence had been misunderstood. Your soulmate once believed you were pulling away emotionally when, in reality, you were trying to understand who could actually be trusted. Now they were hearing this from someone else, and one painful question kept returning: how many times had you tried to warn them without ever saying the words directly? Then the caller revealed why everything had resurfaced today. Something had been discovered among old messages connected to that person, and your name appeared more than once. Your soulmate immediately asked what those messages said, but the caller wouldn't reveal everything at once. One message suggested that you were getting too close to the truth. Another mentioned that your soulmate needed to stop listening to you before certain information came out. That sentence hit hard. Suddenly, your soulmate remembered arguments that seemed to begin from nowhere, rumors about you that appeared at suspiciously convenient moments, and advice from people who repeatedly encouraged them to question your intentions. Was all of that coincidence? Or had someone been quietly shaping the way your soulmate saw you? Stay with this, because the most emotional discovery wasn't what someone had said about you. It was what you had done after realizing what was happening. Instead of fighting publicly or trying to expose everyone, you made a choice your soulmate never understood. You stepped back. Not because your feelings disappeared, but because you feared that pushing harder would place your soulmate in the middle of something they weren't emotionally prepared to face. The caller explained that there was evidence you had even refused an opportunity to defend yourself because doing so would have revealed something deeply painful about someone your soulmate trusted. Your soulmate's eyes filled with emotion. All this time, they may have believed your silence meant you didn't care enough to fight. Now they were beginning to wonder whether your silence had actually been the fight. But before they could process that realization, the caller said, "There's one more thing you need to hear." Apparently, someone had recently tried to erase one particular message, and that message contained the real reason your soulmate was being called today. That deleted message was recovered only hours before the phone call, and the moment your soulmate heard when it had originally been written, their stomach dropped. It came from the exact period when the distance between you suddenly became unbearable. The caller explained that the message wasn't written by you. It was written about you, and it contained a direct instruction to keep certain information away from your soulmate because, in their words, if they hear what really happened, they'll understand why this person walked away. Your soulmate immediately asked who sent it. The caller paused again, but this time your soulmate recognized the hesitation for what it was. The answer was going to hurt. And when the name was finally spoken, your soulmate realized it belonged to someone they had defended when you quietly tried to make them question what was happening. That realization forced your soulmate to revisit one particular memory. There had been a night when you wanted to explain something important, but before you could finish, another person interrupted the situation with information that made your soulmate doubt you. At the time, it looked accidental. Now the caller was saying it may have been deliberate. Even more shocking, the recovered message had been sent shortly before that exact conversation. Your soulmate whispered, "So they knew we were going to talk." The answer was yes. Someone had apparently learned that you were preparing to reveal what you knew, and they moved first. But why were they so desperate to keep you silent? What could possibly be important enough to manipulate a conversation between two people? Something huge is waiting for you, because your soulmate was about to discover that you hadn't simply uncovered a secret. You had uncovered a plan. The caller explained that the plan wasn't about permanently destroying your connection at first. It was about creating enough doubt to make your soulmate stop trusting your instincts. Once that happened, anything you said afterward could be dismissed as jealousy, misunderstanding, or emotional frustration. And for a while, it worked. Your soulmate remembered questioning your motives. They remembered believing explanations that now seemed strangely rehearsed. But there was one part of the recovered message that changed everything. Near the bottom, someone had written that you had already collected something that could prove you weren't imagining any of it. Your soulmate immediately asked, "What did they have?" The caller answered with a detail that made them stand up in shock. You had apparently kept one piece of evidence all this time, but instead of using it against anyone, you placed it somewhere safe, and today, someone finally found it. What they found wasn't dramatic at first glance. It was a small collection of saved messages, dates, and notes you had quietly kept because you knew memories could be questioned, but written details were harder to dismiss. Your soulmate listened as the caller described one entry after another, and suddenly the timeline became impossible to ignore. Each time someone had created doubt between you, there had been a private conversation shortly beforehand. Each time your soulmate had been encouraged to pull away, the same person somehow appeared nearby with another warning about you. But one note was different. Beside a specific date, you had written only a few words about protecting your soulmate from learning something before you could verify it. Your soulmate recognized that date immediately. It was the day they had accused you of no longer caring. That memory hit harder than anything else the caller had revealed. Your soulmate remembered your face, your silence, and the way you didn't defend yourself even when they gave you every opportunity. Back then, your silence felt like confirmation. Now it looked completely different. What if you had stayed quiet because defending yourself would have meant exposing someone your soulmate loved or trusted? What if you chose to carry their misunderstanding rather than hand them a truth you weren't certain they could handle? Your soulmate asked the caller whether your notes explained exactly what you had discovered. The answer was yes, but there was another complication. One page contained a name your soulmate hadn't expected to see anywhere in this story. Don't skip. That name belonged to someone who had always appeared completely neutral, someone who had never openly spoken against you. The caller explained that this person may have known far more than they ever admitted. According to your notes, they had once contacted you privately and asked you to stop looking into what was happening. They didn't threaten you. They didn't argue. Instead, they made an emotional request: leave the situation alone because revealing everything would change your soulmate's life. Your soulmate's hands went cold hearing those words. Why would the truth change their life? And why had you respected that request for so long? Then the caller revealed the detail that shifted the mystery again. You hadn't completely agreed to remain silent. You had apparently given that person one condition. A specific point at which you would finally tell your soulmate everything, no matter who became upset. And according to the recovered notes, that condition had just been met today. The condition you had written down was surprisingly simple: if the hidden situation ever began affecting your soulmate's future again, you would no longer stay silent. And today, according to the caller, that exact line had been crossed. Someone connected to the original secret had made a new decision involving your soulmate without telling them, and your name surfaced because you had anticipated something like this could happen. Your soulmate's voice tightened as they asked what decision had been made. The caller wouldn't give them the full answer yet. Instead, they explained that you had left behind a clear warning in your notes: if this starts again, they deserve to know everything. Those words shook your soulmate. You hadn't been waiting for revenge. You hadn't been waiting for an apology. You had simply been waiting until the truth became necessary to protect their choices. Then came a detail your soulmate never expected. The caller said you had been contacted recently as well. Someone had apparently reached out hoping you would continue keeping quiet, but this time you refused. Your soulmate immediately wanted to know what you said. The caller described your response as calm, short, and impossible to misunderstand. You made it clear that your soulmate had the right to make their own decisions with complete information. That sentence changed something inside them. For so long, they may have wondered why you didn't fight harder to control the outcome between you. Now they understood that control was never what you wanted. You wanted them to choose freely, even if that choice didn't lead back to you. But why would someone still be trying to influence that choice after all this time? And what were they afraid your soulmate would finally discover about you? The answer began with one final record hidden among the notes, a record the caller said had never been intended for anyone else to see. It showed that during the most painful period between you, you had been offered an easy way to clear your own name. All you needed to do was reveal what another person had done. But you refused because the consequences would have fallen heavily on your soulmate at a moment when they were already struggling emotionally. Your soulmate covered their mouth, suddenly understanding the price of your silence. Yet the caller quickly added, "There's something you still don't know." The person you protected back then had apparently contacted the caller this morning, asking whether the evidence had been found. And when they realized it had, they made one unexpected confession about you that your soulmate was never supposed to hear. The confession began with 6 words your soulmate never expected to hear: "They knew more than we thought." The person admitted that you had figured out the truth much earlier than everyone realized. You knew certain conversations were being hidden, you knew someone was feeding your soulmate a distorted version of events, and eventually, you even discovered why. But instead of exposing everything immediately, you approached that person privately and gave them an opportunity to stop. Your soulmate interrupted the caller. They confronted them? Yes, but not with anger. You apparently told them that if they genuinely cared about your soulmate, they needed to stop interfering and allow your soulmate to make their own choices. That detail left your soulmate stunned. They had imagined you walking away defeated. In reality, before stepping back, you had quietly fought for their freedom to choose without pressure. But the confession went deeper. The person admitted that after speaking with you, they became frightened, not because you threatened them, but because you understood exactly what they were doing. That was when the stories about you became stronger. Your soulmate remembered how suddenly people began questioning your intentions. One person said you were too emotional. Another suggested you couldn't be trusted. Someone else insisted your soulmate would be happier if they simply forgot you. At the time, those opinions sounded independent. Now your soulmate had to ask, had they all started from the same source? The caller confirmed that several messages suggested exactly that. Your soulmate's voice cracked as they asked the question that had been building throughout the entire call: why didn't they just tell me? The caller went silent, because the confession contained an answer, and it was far more personal than your soulmate expected. You had apparently believed that if you forced the truth onto your soulmate, they might choose you for the wrong reason, out of anger, betrayal, or guilt rather than love. So you made an almost impossible decision. You stepped away and allowed your soulmate to believe whatever they needed to believe, trusting that one day the truth would stand on its own. Hearing this, your soulmate began crying quietly. How many times had they misunderstood your silence? How many nights had they thought you simply stopped caring? But the caller wasn't finished. There was still one unanswered piece. Why had the person finally confessed today after protecting the secret for so long? The answer came seconds later. Someone had discovered that your soulmate was about to make a major personal decision, and the person who once helped keep you apart suddenly realized that staying silent now could permanently change both of your lives. That major decision was closer than your soulmate realized. The caller explained that within days, your soulmate was expected to respond to an opportunity that could take their life in a completely different direction. Until this phone call, they had been preparing to say yes. But someone who knew the entire history understood what that yes could mean. your soulmate might move forward while still believing a story about you that had never been completely true. That was why the confession finally came out. The person who once stayed silent could no longer watch another decision being made on incomplete information. Your soulmate looked at everything differently now. The timing of the call. The recovered messages. Your notes. Even your decision to step away. But one question became more urgent than all the others. Did you know what their soulmate was about to choose? The caller answered carefully. Yes. You had heard about the decision, but you hadn't tried to stop it. You hadn't called your soulmate, pressured anyone, or demanded another chance to explain yourself. Instead, you said something that left the caller speechless. If they know the truth and still choose that path, I'll respect it. But let the choice actually be theirs. Your soulmate lowered their head when those words were repeated. That was the difference they were finally beginning to understand. Even now, when you could have used everything you knew to pull them emotionally toward you, you refused to manipulate their decision. And suddenly, the question wasn't simply whether you still cared. It was whether your soulmate had ever been given a fair chance to understand how much you cared. Don't skip, because the caller had one more piece of information that changed the meaning of this entire conversation. Before ending the call, the person who confessed had given the caller permission to reveal one final message, something they remembered you saying during that private confrontation long ago. Your soulmate braced themselves, expecting anger or disappointment. Instead, the caller repeated your words. One day, they may hate me for leaving, but I'd rather carry that than watch them lose themselves because everyone else decided what was best for them. Your soulmate's eyes filled again. Suddenly, every unexplained goodbye carried another meaning. Every silence felt heavier. But then the caller said, "There's something else. This is why I needed to reach you today." Apparently, after learning about the major decision your soulmate was facing, you had done one thing nobody expected. You had prepared something specifically for them, not to convince them to come back, but to finally give them the truth in your own words. And the caller knew exactly where it was. Your soulmate didn't even ask what it was at first. They simply sat there, staring ahead, because suddenly this mysterious phone call had become something much more personal. The caller explained that what you prepared wasn't some dramatic demand or emotional plea. It was a private recording made after you learned about the decision your soulmate was facing. You had apparently recorded it once, without editing yourself or trying to make your words perfect. And there was one unusual instruction attached to it: your soulmate should hear the truth before making their choice, but nobody should tell them what choice to make afterward. That detail made your soulmate's chest tighten. Even now, you were refusing to control the outcome. But before the caller could explain how they could receive the recording, your soulmate asked the question they could no longer hold back: "Did they say anything about me?" The caller became quiet, then admitted that they had heard only the first few seconds while confirming the recording was genuine. Your soulmate immediately wanted to know what you said. The opening wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter. You simply said that if your soulmate was hearing your voice, then something you had hoped would remain in the past had returned, and they deserved to know why you disappeared when staying would have been easier for your heart. Your soulmate's eyes closed. That one sentence challenged everything they had believed about your absence. You hadn't left because staying meant nothing. You left because staying while exposing the truth would have created consequences you refused to force upon them. But there was more. The caller said the recording was longer than expected, and near the middle, you apparently revealed the one moment when you almost broke your silence completely. That moment happened after your soulmate unknowingly defended the very person who had been interfering. You were ready to show everything, the messages, the dates, the contradictions, but something stopped you. According to the notes attached to the recording, your soulmate had said one sentence that night that made you change your mind. The caller wouldn't repeat it because you had explained its meaning yourself in the recording, and your soulmate needed to hear it in context. Now their curiosity was mixed with fear. What had they said without realizing its impact on you? What could have made you put the evidence away and accept being misunderstood instead? Then the caller revealed one final detail: the recording wasn't sitting in some forgotten place. Someone was already bringing it to your soulmate. And according to the message the caller had just received, that person was only minutes away. Minutes suddenly felt like hours. Your soulmate stayed near the phone, replaying every revelation they had just heard, when a new message arrived from the person bringing your recording. They were close, but they included one warning: once your soulmate heard what you had said, several memories they had trusted for years might look completely different. That warning created a strange hesitation. Was your soulmate truly ready to discover that some of their strongest beliefs about you had been built on incomplete information? They thought about the night you walked away. The accusations you never answered. The questions you seemed unwilling to explain. For years, your silence had looked like indifference. Now every new clue suggested the opposite. And one thought became impossible to ignore: what if the moment your soulmate believed you cared the least was actually the moment you were protecting them the most? Then came a knock. Your soulmate's heart jumped. Standing outside was someone they recognized immediately, someone who had witnessed pieces of the situation years ago but had never openly chosen a side. They handed over a small device containing your recording and said something unexpected: "Before you listen, you should know they never asked me to defend them." Your soulmate stared at them. The person explained that you had only asked them to make sure the recording reached your soulmate if the old interference ever returned. Nothing more. No request for sympathy. No request for reconciliation. That made the recording feel heavier in your soulmate's hands. They finally pressed play. Your voice came through quietly, and after a brief pause, you began explaining the night everything changed. But then you mentioned the sentence your soulmate had unknowingly said, the sentence that stopped you from revealing the evidence. Your soulmate remembered it the instant you repeated it: "I can't handle losing anyone else right now." Suddenly, the entire past shifted. You had realized that exposing the person your soulmate trusted would force them into another painful loss at the worst possible moment. So you put the evidence away. You allowed yourself to become the person they misunderstood because you believed they needed stability more than they needed your vindication. Your soulmate covered their face as the recording continued. But then your voice changed. You explained that there was something even you hadn't known back then, something you discovered much later that made you question whether walking away had actually protected them at all. Your soulmate leaned closer to the recording. Because according to you, the person everyone had been focusing on wasn't the one who started the interference. Someone else had been quietly directing it from the beginning. Your soulmate stopped the recording for a moment. That single revelation was almost impossible to process. All this time, everyone had focused on the person whose messages had been recovered, but your voice was now saying they weren't the beginning of the story. They had been influenced too. When your soulmate pressed play again, you explained how you discovered it. One phrase kept appearing in separate conversations, spoken by people who supposedly weren't communicating with each other. At first, you dismissed it as coincidence. Then you found an old message showing that the exact phrase had come from someone your soulmate trusted deeply. That person had never openly criticized you. In fact, they had sometimes acted supportive of your connection. And that was precisely why you hadn't suspected them sooner. Your recording continued with a painful admission. You said discovering this truth made you question every decision you had made, because protecting your soulmate from one betrayal may have allowed a deeper deception to continue. You described going back through old conversations and noticing a pattern you had missed before. Whenever your soulmate seemed ready to trust you again, this person would appear with concern, advice, or some perfectly timed piece of information that created hesitation. Never enough to look suspicious. Never direct enough to be blamed. Just enough to keep uncertainty alive. Your soulmate whispered, "Who?" But your recording didn't reveal the name yet. Instead, you asked them to remember one particular day, the day someone unexpectedly told them you were planning to leave before you had ever made that decision. How could anyone have known something that wasn't true yet? Then your voice revealed the detail that made your soulmate's hands tremble. That false story had reached you too. Someone told you that your soulmate had already decided to let you go, while your soulmate was being told that you had decided to leave them. Two people were quietly being handed opposite versions of the same lie, and both were waiting for the other to prove it wrong. Neither of you knew what the other had heard. Suddenly, your soulmate remembered the coldness, the hesitation, the conversations where both of you seemed guarded for reasons neither could explain. But your recording said there was finally proof of where those two stories originated. You had traced both versions back through separate messages until they reached one common person, and just before you spoke their name, you warned your soulmate that hearing it might change the way they understood someone who was still close to them today. Your soulmate almost stopped the recording again, but this time they forced themselves to keep listening. Then you finally said the name. The shock wasn't that this person had been present during those difficult years. The shock was how trusted they had remained afterward. This was someone your soulmate had gone to for advice, someone who repeatedly claimed they only wanted peace, and someone who had comforted them after the distance between you became real. Your recording explained that you never wanted your soulmate to accept this accusation simply because it came from you. That was why you had included dates and copies of the separate conversations. One message encouraged your soulmate to question you. Another, sent within hours, encouraged you to believe your soulmate was already moving on. The wording was different, but the intention appeared painfully similar: keep both of you uncertain, and make sure neither person felt safe enough to speak honestly first. Then your soulmate noticed something even more disturbing. The same trusted person had contacted them recently about the major decision they were preparing to make. Suddenly, today's timing no longer felt accidental. Your recording had warned that if this person ever became involved in another life-changing choice, the past could no longer remain buried. Your soulmate reached for their phone and checked the recent messages. There it was, a seemingly caring message offering advice about their future. Hours earlier, it had felt supportive. Now one sentence stood out because it sounded almost identical to language used years ago. Sometimes you have to close an old door before your real life can begin. Your soulmate stared at those words. Was this genuine concern, or was someone once again trying to decide which door they should close? But your recording still refused to tell your soulmate what to believe. You told them to verify everything themselves. Ask questions. Compare dates. Speak directly to the people involved. Most importantly, don't make a decision because of fear, guilt, or pressure, including pressure from you. That final part broke something open emotionally. Even after everything, you were giving them freedom rather than demanding trust. Then your voice softened and revealed why you had finally created this recording. Someone had contacted you 3 days earlier with information suggesting the same pattern was beginning again, and this time you recognized it immediately. But the person who warned you wasn't an old friend, a family member, or anyone your soulmate would expect. It was someone who had once helped spread the false story about you, and they were finally ready to explain why they did it. Your soulmate leaned closer as your recording described that unexpected confession. The person who once helped spread the false story admitted they hadn't known the entire truth at the time. They had been shown selected messages, carefully removed from context, and convinced that keeping you away was somehow protecting your soulmate. But recently, they discovered the original conversations, and realized certain lines had been deliberately left out. One missing line changed everything. It showed that you weren't trying to pressure your soulmate into choosing you. You were actually asking someone to stop putting them in the middle. The person who confessed felt sick realizing they had helped turn your attempt to protect your soulmate into evidence against you. And then they revealed something even harder to explain. The person who gave them those edited messages had contacted them again just 3 days ago. This time, however, they refused to cooperate. Instead, they saved the conversation and sent it to you. Your recording explained that the new messages followed an eerily familiar pattern. Questions about your soulmate's current plans. Questions about whether you two had spoken recently. And one particularly revealing question: do they still believe what happened back then? Your soulmate's heart started pounding. Why would anyone care what they believed about an old situation unless that belief still mattered today? The person confessing asked the same question, and apparently the response came too quickly. Because if they start questioning the past, they'll question everything. That sentence stayed with your soulmate. Everything? What else was there to question? The phone call had begun as a mystery about you, but now it was exposing something much larger, a pattern of influence that may have quietly shaped decisions for years. Then your recording reached the newest piece of evidence. You explained that after receiving those messages, you compared one phone number with information from the past. It matched a number connected to an old conversation that nobody had been able to explain at the time. But there was another surprise. The person using that number apparently believed you still didn't know who they were. You had deliberately allowed them to believe that because you wanted to understand what they were trying to prevent. And finally, 3 days ago, they revealed it without realizing what they had done. They mentioned a private detail about your soulmate's upcoming decision that only a very small circle of people knew. Your soulmate immediately began mentally listing those people. Then your recording said there was one simple way to identify exactly who had leaked that information, and the proof was sitting inside a message your soulmate had received that very morning. Your soulmate immediately paused the recording and opened the message from that morning. At first, nothing looked unusual. It was warm, supportive, almost perfectly ordinary. But then they remembered what you had said. Look closely at the detail nobody outside that small circle should know. There it was. One sentence referred to the timing of their upcoming decision, even though your soulmate had never shared that timing with this person. Their hearts started racing. How did they know? More importantly, why had your soulmate never noticed the mistake before? They pressed play again, and your voice explained that this was exactly what finally convinced you to speak. Someone wasn't merely discussing the past anymore. They were gathering information about your soulmate's present, passing it between people, and once again trying to influence what happened before your soulmate could make an independent choice. But this time, you had decided the pattern would not remain invisible. The recording then revealed something your soulmate wasn't prepared for. You had already spoken privately with the person who confessed, and together you compared the old messages with the new ones. Certain phrases appeared in both. Certain questions followed the same order. Even the timing was strangely familiar. Information would be collected first, then concern would appear, followed by advice designed to create doubt. Your soulmate suddenly remembered receiving several recent messages asking whether they were completely sure about what they wanted. Those questions had seemed caring. Now they felt different. But your voice warned them not to assume guilt based only on similarities. Check everything yourself, you said. I was wrong once because I believed I understood the whole picture too early. I won't make that mistake for you. That sentence mattered, because you weren't asking your soulmate to blindly believe you. You were asking them to finally trust their own ability to see clearly. Then your recording gave them one specific thing to verify. You mentioned a conversation your soulmate had supposedly had 2 weeks earlier, a conversation someone later described to you in surprising detail. The problem was, according to your notes, the person claiming to know about it hadn't been present. Your soulmate's face changed instantly because they remembered that conversation. Only 3 people had been there. If details from it had reached someone outside that room, then one of those 3 had shared them. And suddenly, your soulmate knew exactly where to look. One of the people present had sent them a follow-up message that same night, mentioning they had spoken to someone who could help. At the time, your soulmate never asked who. Now that unanswered question felt enormous. They opened the old conversation, scrolled to that message, and noticed something beneath it they had completely forgotten, a forwarded attachment carrying a name that connected the present situation directly back to the very first secret you uncovered years ago. Your soulmate stared at that name until the letters almost stopped looking real. It belonged to someone who had appeared at the edges of this story again and again, never close enough to attract suspicion, yet somehow connected to every turning point. Years ago, that person had been described as merely helping with a difficult situation. 2 weeks ago, they were suddenly being consulted again. Your recording explained that this